wanting to write the book. I really owe it to Adam Parfrey of Feral House, who published this book, Chemtrails, HAARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth. Adam, I had done some editing for him years before when I was living in England, and he approached me and knew I had done a tremendous amount of research on a variety of topics that we would sometimes discuss, because I had written a series called the Sub Rosa America series. It's a historical fictional format of America since Kennedy's assassination, and to do that, to study what Peter Dale Scott calls the deep politics of America, I had to look at many, many subjects. And you mentioned MK Ultra. I definitely spent several years on that and worked for a while with Ron Patton, publisher Ron Patton, who's a friend of mine, used to live in my hometown. And Ron and I did a magazine called MK Zine. We only were able to get 3 issues out before Ron ran out of money, but it was a really, really good magazine about mind control, and particularly in America. So I had already looked at a variety of subjects having to do with deep politics, and I also had a pretty thick file on HAARP. And I had been looking at HAARP since 1996, the year after Nick Begich and Gene Manning came out with their Angels Don't Play This HAARP. I was reading the book one day at a substitute teaching job, and talking to a couple of male teachers at the faculty room lunch table with another woman present, and they were quite interested in it. I didn't know that much, but I certainly was sharing with them. But the woman sitting with us be sort of diving into her sandwich, so I never did really hear a thing she said. But the next day, I had a military helicopter over my house, hovering for about 5 minutes, either to intimidate me or perhaps to put my house on geographic coordinates. That's when I realized how hot this topic was, and so I began to be a little more careful with my reading materials in public places. And then it was so, when I moved to when I was in London, living in London, I would notice that the sky over London looked like a crossword puzzle. And I hadn't put together that HAARP, my thick file on HAARP, had something to do with what I was seeing over London. It was only when I got back to the States and was living in Santa Fe, met Clifford, and he and his wife and a friend and I would have breakfast every other week or so. And Clifford and I would start talking about chemtrails, that I began to realize that the ionizing of the atmosphere, which is what HAARP is so good at, it creates tremendous energy in the ionosphere way above us, above the magnetosphere, and then sucks it back into our atmosphere so that the lower atmosphere becomes ionized. But in order to maintain a certain level of ionization for all of its agendas, it needed the chemtrails. In particular, it needed the heavy metals. As you know, it's mainly aluminum, barium, and strontium, but there are other metals in it. And so I began to see the chemistry of what was being set up in the lower atmosphere. And because Clifford was drawing my blood and the blood of other people, and was studying our saliva in order to see if we had the fibers, I did what he calls the red wine test. And I definitely had the fibers, and I definitely saw under his microscope or spectroscope, I don't remember which it was, I saw this little hybrid that I'll discuss in more detail, this little hybrid creature, bacteria-like, digging its head into my erythrocytes, and eating the iron out of my erythrocytes. So I definitely understood that, oh, it isn't just the people with the lesions on their skin who are picking fibers out, seemingly very electrically sensitive fibers, and then being told by doctors that they have delusional parasitosis.
Yeah.
It isn't just them who have these fibers. We all have these fibers. We're breathing them. They're coming down on the chemtrails. And they are assaulting our hemoglobin. So once I realized that it was endemic and not isolated for this person or that, though there are probably very terrestrial delivery systems as well. But in this case, it was because of my friendship with Clifford and and being involved in the initial blood test that I began to realize, wow, this is huge. This puts all the other chemical and biological warfare that we all have been subjected to in this country, not counting other countries, since the Cold War and before. This puts them in the shade, because this is a nanotech operation. And that's where, with Clifford, I watched it with great frustration as he tried to get the CDC and the EPA to duplicate his research in a typical scientific fashion so that then a peer review board could look at it, et cetera, and it would become mainstream. Well, I watched them just block everything he tried to do, and yet at his site, as many as 100 and I can't remember what the number is, 160 alphabet soup agencies were hitting his site every week, wanting to see what he was coming up with on his own as he retrofitted everything that I'm sure they already had. So I've looked at it as an experiment. And then I get back to the Northwest. Adam Parfrey contacts me and asks me, do I feel that I could write a book on chemtrails? Well, I mean, it was just destiny knocking. It was like Beethoven's Fifth for me. It was so transparent. Of course I can, because why else have I known Clifford? And why else did I almost get a bachelor's in biology? I always loved biology. So that's how the book came to be. It took me 1.5 years to write and research. And I learned a lot about the researching process when you can't go to the library and order a big armful of books on the topic that you're writing about, because it's a national security experiment. And there is nothing available as far as mainstream written books. However, everything that I needed was pretty much in open source on the Internet. And to me, it's sort of like what I think it was Dick Cheney said at one point. Someone had warned him that maybe someone would find out about something, and Dick Cheney said, "Oh, Americans don't read anymore." Well, maybe that's why all of this is in open source. But the key to keeping this an open secret, lying right in front of your nose, is that twofold in my mind. One, it's scattered all over the place and mixed very carefully, in my opinion, with some disinformation, a little bit of bending this, and a little bit of, one of the things, for example, I found was the constant use of the subjunctive tense. We may have geoengineering. We may have to do geoengineering someday. And that, of course, it's already been going on for many years. So leaving it scattered about like Osiris's body, and then using the subjunctive, and then using the conspiracy theory catch-all to marginalize and draw the mind toward doubt. But I found that everything I needed was on the Internet. And I reread Will Thomas's Chemtrails Confirmed. I reread Angels Don't Play This Harp, and then a couple other books Nick did, and then I read a couple more. A short one on the Aurora by Bill Sweetman. Anything that would get me into the language, the technical language of the technology. And then, of course, when Clifford and I were deconstructing over the telephone Bernard Eastland's 1987 patent, wherein he pretty much, if you're willing to read that sort of patent language and really get into it and dissect it, pretty much explains everything about how HARP works. And when I say HARP, Mike, I want to be clear to listeners, I'm not just talking about Gakona, Alaska. Gakona, that one installation, which actually works in tandem with 3 other installations up by the Arctic Circle, that is just one ionospheric heater. There are many, many installations around the world, and if I were to, I think I list 50-some in the book, but there are many more. I would say between the ionospheric heaters, the radar installations, particularly on NATO bases, and radio observatories, which act as receivers. And then that's not counting radio stations, cell towers that have all sorts of military artifacts on them that have to do with NEXRADs and basically the steering of the plasma in the atmosphere for moving weather systems. I would have to say there's close to 100. And it's very much on a grid. And there were 2 chapters in the book that my publisher decided to take out. I was a little upset, as you can imagine, but when he explained his reasoning, it made sense. He felt that those 2 chapters, which really go into what I call the smart grid, and how our nervous systems are being plugged into this ionized atmosphere we're now all breathing, he felt that it was worth another book and should be expanded. And that what I had written already was surprising. It would be enough for people to digest. And so that remains to be seen if I will write that. And that goes from the smart grid, the idea of how the smart grid is set up. And I would go into all sorts of things, fiber optics and the cell towers and our nervous system, cyclotron resonance, and all of Dr. Robert O. Becker's ideas on how cyclotron resonance affects our, if it's pulsed with an ELF, a very long wave that can actually completely go around the Earth in one long wave, how that could plug our nervous system into this ionized atmosphere, and that, I admit that I'm very interested in that because I too did a long stint on MK Ultra. And very much understood by the end of my research into the history of MK Ultra, which, as you know, they say ended in 73, and that's nonsense, how it goes forward into what I call EMK Ultra, which is electronic, remote mind control. And this is a godsend for them, whereas this Tesla tech that they're using and have developed a very, very sophisticated system. Tesla, of course, saw it as being free energy for all citizens. Obviously, that's not the direction it's going. And now it has been into the weapon that Tesla had already discovered between Colorado Springs and his experiments there and Weidencliff out on Long Island. So now we're there, and the way I do life is I get stronger the more I know. And that's, of course, I'm very much an intellectual, very much a student and a researcher. But I really recommend to people to not allow fear to blind their minds, because once you understand how this is working, then you can ameliorate various aspects of your outer environment and your inner bodily environment. And that's kind of how I see it, is this war is long, many battles are coming, and I need to keep in as tip-top shape as I can while not being a Luddite, and while still using computers and living around Wi-Fi environments. However, there are many things that we can study, that we can incorporate into our lifestyle that will not only make our health flourish, but will protect us from this particular electromagnetic era that many of us have been born into. And maybe we'll be able to do something. Maybe then some terrible cataclysm is coming from the power mongers, the psychopathic power mongers who always take things to the nth degree. I don't know, but what I have in mind is future generations. And I wanted to write this book just to give people talking points, if you will, and to once and for all put to death that silly conspiracy theory nonsense, which if you look at the over 600 footnotes in the book, obviously I don't think it's a conspiracy theory in that dismissive way. It has to be categorized as a conspiracy theory because, well, we're not being allowed anywhere else. I mean, we don't control the media. The media has been controlled by the CIA ever since Operation Mockingbird and Cord Meyer. So we have to take what our situation we're given, just as a guerrilla warrior would in a jungle situation with second-rate weapons and defense systems. I don't mind, because I know I'm in alliance with the good guys. I just want to give people more tools so that they're not either running around like chickens with their head off of the sky is falling, or that they're trying to hide from what they feel they cannot have any power over. I really feel that knowledge is power, scientia est potentia. And that's what I stand for, and that's why I work hard to educate people so that we can deal with these technologies coming toward us at such an amazing pace.
Yeah, absolutely, Elana. And I absolutely agree with the comment you made, which we have to live our lives pursuing the truth, not in fear.
Yes.
Right? Because when we know the truth, then we're going to make better decisions and better choices. And we're going to be better equipped to protect ourselves. Now, one of the questions I had for you, though, is the blood test that you were involved in with Clifford Carnicom. How long ago was that?
Let's see. I've been back in the Northwest 3 years, so probably 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay. Were there any follow-ups after that?
As a blood test?
Yeah.
No, but I know pretty much how these little creatures operate. They are genetically engineered. The way I would describe them is they have characteristics of a bacteria and characteristics of a sensor microprocessor. So I'm sure you've looked at pictures of them, and I'm sure that Sophia Smallstorm has talked about it. You can see the different colors in them. They have different colors for different features and jobs that they have. They operate as a hive mind. And I think the question that everyone, probably has is, if we all have the fibers, why don't we all have the lesions? And I have thought long and hard on that, and definitely talked with Clifford on that, and I'm really not sure, but I do notice two things. I have interviewed several people with Morgellons. A couple of them died. And the other, I don't know how the others have turned out. I haven't followed up on them. And what I did notice is that their immune systems were pretty much already compromised. And whether or not they were targeted individually in an experimental way, well, if you think about it, and given that I think just about everything going on now is still in the experimental phase, though they're having quite the number of successes, I would say that some people are individually targeted to just to wind it out to the full extreme, to see how the doctors respond in hospitals, to see who needs to be brought on board, to follow their hospital records, their clinic records. For the homeless, to centralize the homeless recording system, which I don't know if you remember, but George W. Bush did when he was in office, so that to take a shower or have a bed at night in some sort of mission or place, then the homeless has to put their number in so that they can be tracked. I remember being shocked years ago when I was studying the Nazis during the war and how they took these meticulous records. Well, and they had IBM computers, of course, but nothing like what we have today. And we put the Nazis to shame in our record keeping of people involved in experiments the military is interested in. So I think that the other factor of this hybrid is as I said, it has sensors in it. These sensors are two-way through the microprocessors. In other words, the sensors can be communicated with. The organism itself can be communicated with remotely. And my guess is that another possible scenario for why some people have the lesions and some don't is that someone has decided somewhere, maybe at one of those computer monitors in Colorado and the old NORAD, that they'll make sure that this person has a full breakout.
Could it be the body rejecting this hybrid that's in the body that's causing the lesions and the Morgellons outbreak?
Attempting to get better, yes, but my guess is that they would have multiplied to such a number that it wouldn't happen until that number was reached. I have no idea what that number is, but I know that it's in the billions.
Yeah.
So in my case, I followed the same diet. I became macrobiotic when I was 21, and for 6 years was very rigid in the diet as I was actually, I think, healing my hypoglycemia. That was gone, and my health has been fabulous all these years. I'm much less rigid, of course, but I very much learned how to read acidity and alkalinity. And this is the key. Clifford has been able to grow these little creatures in petri dishes, has made many cultures and experimented with many cultures using various chemical solutions and normal solutions that everybody has in their bathroom to see what they react to, what they grow and proliferate in, and what he has discovered is no surprise to me, which is they love acidity and they hate alkalinity. They will not grow. They will not die in an alkaline environment, but they will not grow. They will go into stasis. In an acidity environment, they go ballistic. They go nuts and reproduce at an amazing rate. So in us, say we're the petri dish, which we are, I watch my acid alkaline intake, and how I determine that is not with little pieces of pH paper, but over, we're talking 40 some years I've been on this particular diet and have been very aware. No doctors. I'm 67 years old. I look much younger, of course, and I haven't been to a doctor since I was 13 because mainly I don't trust them, but my health has not merited it. I pretty much do my own health. And so I know they're in here, but they are not, I do not have the subcutaneous crawling sensation. I do not have lesions at this point. I never have had any. So, in a way, if I hadn't seen my blood under the microscope, it would be hard for me to imagine that I have this going on. And I think that's the condition of many people. They are not aware that they're breathing anything in other than, maybe some people now know about the heavy metals, which in itself is very difficult to balance. And, of course, I would highly recommend that people detox now and then.
I'm sorry. Now, has Clifford done a lot of these blood tests where he's found the same type of thing in others? I'm just trying to get an idea of the breadth of this.
Well, I'd have to get the exact number from him, but I think he's done a culture of about 200 blood samples.
Interesting.
Is it in every part of the country? Well, I don't know, because this is part of the problem, isn't it? Clifford, to my knowledge, and maybe Mike Castle. Mike Castle might have done some of this. He's mentioned in my book. Anyway, I'm not familiar with all of the scientists who are actually isolating these things and running real science experimentation. And that includes repeating it and repeating it and repeating it so that you know what you've got. Clifford is the only person I know of, and he's done it all on a shoestring budget because he has, where is the money? Where are the people with the money that want to put it behind something that can really give us some information? It constantly reminds me of the AIDS epidemic, because I did research on that as well, and of course the World Health Organization was a primary in backing the experiments that led to the creation of the AIDS virus. And so this is, to me, just another one. The only thing that makes it a little weirder to me is that there are the nano-sized microprocessors and sensors in these hybrids that we have beneath our skin. So that gives it a twist that I still think about. And I go into it in the last chapter of the book. There are, to have, you asked earlier about the military families. I would assume that this was very much like MK Ultra in that when research starts, the military starts with its own because they have authority over them. Orders are orders. And that would include their families, as it did with MK Ultra. But given how I have no access to the military other than the occasional article that comes out of a whistleblower or someone who speaks out, and that this military connection is probably the last thing anyone looks at. Oh, gee, look, their family is, they're all military. Well, it should be the first thing we look at when we're trying to figure out how these choices are made of people to experiment on. But the big part of this is planetary. I don't know that China and Russia and other non-NATO countries are experimenting on their people to the degree NATO countries are. But I know that the atmosphere is one, And when Russia recently finally made the decision to not allow GMOs in their country, I actually wondered if it was because they completely get the tandem relationship between GMOs and what's being dropped by the chemtrails. As you know, Monsanto came out with an aluminum-resistant fertilizer.
Yes.
And Monsanto is completely in bed with these when I say military, I'm thinking of, yes, the military, but I'm also thinking of military contractors. I'm thinking of Lockheed Martin, TR3, L3, all these guys. Raytheon for sure, because as you remember, Raytheon was one of the initial holders of the HARP patents.
Yes.
So we're talking about the military-industrial complex and about a world takeover in cahoots with elite transnational dynastic families. I like to think of them because most vast corporations are run by families that are quite old. And this is enriching the medical industry. It's enriching big pharma. It's again, as I say in one of the chapters, I talk about how this is just disaster capitalism on a large scale. People ask me on radio shows, are they trying to kill us all? Is this depopulation? Well, I'm sure depopulation is something that this particular technology of the chemtrails HARP pump and dump can do. Absolutely. It can also be a matter of broadcasting frequencies in order to make entire cities or entire swaths of a city violent or pacific. When the Ukraine thing hit back in the spring, it was the first thing I thought of. That, now we're going to continue experimenting with frequency. I mean, I thought it when the Egyptian spring happened. I thought it when Libya happened. I mean, I can't prove any of this, but I certainly understand the technology to the degree that by ionizing the atmosphere and by being able to steer perhaps a plume of plasma, which is highly ixionized, over, say, the city of London, that you could then zap it with some of the NexRads or other bits and pieces throughout the city, the cell towers that have all sorts of arrays on them. You could easily hit with frequency a certain part of the city or the entire city. That would not be a problem. So I kind of think this is the arrival of the electromagnetics that they've been looking for and heading toward through the Cold War, which I really feel was not exactly as it was presented to us. It was more of a sibling rivalry between Russia and the United States, but a way to get people to pour money into weapons development.
The good guy, bad guy. Yeah,
the usual.
Yep.
And back then, as you recall, when Russia had the woodpecker and was targeting the American embassy in Moscow and giving all the people there cancer. That was the same device. It's just that now it's a vast grid, and we have, after all of the nuclear tests up in the Van Allen belts, we have the capability beyond nuclear detonation to stimulate the ionosphere and draw down tremendous electrical plasma which is the fourth state of matter. It's sort of a gas and matter thing together, and draw it down and steer it, and then stimulate it and move weather systems and et cetera. I mean, it's a tremendous weapon beyond belief, and that's why I put on the covers full spectrum dominance. That is a military policy now. Full spectrum dominance is the name of the policy, which is as innocent, seemingly innocent, as drawing psychologists and anthropologists into war theaters, having them research various cultures so that the cultures can be undermined in a, quote, non-lethal, unquote, way, all the way to making all of life a battle space.
Yeah.
And everyone in life weaponized. So, I mean, are we crazy yet?
No, we're beyond crazy. And, Elana, what I wanted to ask you is just to let me see if I can connect the dots here. So these hybrid organisms that we're calling Morgellons, what is the end state? In other words, is that what is being used to connect people to the frequency so they can manipulate the population with frequency? Or I'm just trying to understand how that ties out. Because you said these organisms have microprocessors in them. So what's your theory, or what's Clifford's theory on what exactly is going on? Why is it set up that way? What are they trying to do?
It seems to, I would say, both of us, and he's much more conservative than I am, and we'll need to test it and test it and test it to make sure he can really say this. It seems to me that all of this is going toward a transhumanist future.
Yeah.
And the idea of being able to plug in 7 billion people's nervous systems to an ionized atmosphere so that they can be accessed in any way you see fit at any time during any day or night of any season is very attractive to the military, and exactly how the ultimate of their full spectrum dominance hopes lies in that absolute control, absolute, into the nervous system. And in getting there, it's important to remember that the scientists working on this, think of all the scientists who couldn't get grant money from anywhere but the military and the military-industrial complex, and each of them having to then not only sign a confidentiality agreement and basically put their lives and their families' lives on the line, but also that they were working under a typical military need-to-know compartmentalized jurisdiction. And so many of these scientists, I'm sure, are agonizing now as they begin to put the pieces together over what they really provided. And some of the whistleblowers coming forward are saying that. But I'm thinking at this point in your question of the guys who were working on genetically engineering a creature. Not only does this creature eat iron is its primary diet, so it was obviously made for blood systems.
Yeah.
But it also simulates whatever it is told to simulate. So the people who've said that they're pulling spiders from their lesions, little crawdaddy-looking things.
Yeah, little creature types of stuff. I've
yes.
heard this and read this, yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So my guess is that they've been programmed, because these are microprocessors, so they're programmed. They've been programmed, and they can perhaps be adjusted. Either they're being adjusted chemically by the person's diet and environment, or they're being remotely contacted in order to, okay, now you're going to be a crawdad, or, okay, now you're going to take over the person's scalp. You're going to seem like a hair matrix. That's going on. So here's a creature that that a scientist might feel proud of, that it can be programmed for a variety of things, like the ones they dumped down in the Gulf after the oil disaster.
Yep.
They were programmed to eat oil. So I can see the scientists thinking, oh, this is a good thing. Maybe it'll eat cancer cells, But what's happened is, and maybe there's some pride there too, but I can't imagine they're going to give the person a Nobel Prize and make it public, is what Clifford has discovered. I don't know if you remember that we used to have 6 biological kingdoms, and they were called Eubacteria, Archaebacteria, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. Those were knocked down to 3 domains in 1977 by Carl R. Woese, W-O-E-S-E, interesting last name, and into bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. All of which you can determine the differences based on cell type, cell wall, membrane, protein synthesis, transfer of RNA, and sensitivity to antibiotics. So now what's happened with this little, what Clifford has coined as a cross-domain bacteria, is that it has all 3 domains in it. And so if anyone is in doubt that this has been genetically engineered, it is the rare creature indeed that would cross those lines between the 3 domains. So this is definitely an engineered species, and I feel it is going toward many more experiments, and we are the petri dishes for the transhumanist future. Transhumanist future doesn't just mean being hooked up to a computer. It means becoming a droid or bot, imagine all the different kinds of creatures you could make people into, maybe like the worker bees, the merchant bees, this sort of thing. That's the way I look at it.
Well, and they have their poster boy, Ray Kurzweil, constantly talking about transhumanism and how, this is what is going to happen and how wonderful it's going to be. They're definitely setting it up, and this is what they do. It's like when they have David Keith go out there and set it up with regard to, we could possibly do this, consider doing that with regard to the atmosphere and the ionosphere. What they're really saying is, this is what we're doing, like right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it's open. It's open, you notice, because now we're so manipulated by our media, we can be swayed from one side to the other overnight, and they know that.
Yeah.
I want to just run this by you. Clifford has these ideas, 6 strategies for countering the Morgellons organism, assaulting our red blood cells, and devouring the iron in our blood. So here's what Clifford says. 1, alkalinize the blood. 2, antioxidation. 3, increase the utilization and absorption of existing iron. 4, inhibit the growth of iron-consuming bacterial archaeal-like forms, by doing the previous 3 things, by the way.
Okay.
5, improve the flow of bile to further alkalinize the blood and aid the digestive process. So a liver cleanse and a gallbladder cleanse would be a good thing. And finally, then he says at 6, detoxify the liver, and I would add the gallbladder.
Okay.
So those are Clifford's ideas on how to ameliorate what we're all undergoing. And when I say this, understand these fibers have been found in placenta of just born babies. So you don't have to be breathing even out here in order to have this happen. You see what I mean? Well,
and also for the folks that are listening, it's not just humans. It's in your pets, it's in your dogs, it's in your cats, it's in the birds, it's in all wildlife.
Yes.
Right? So for those that can't really connect to humanity, and they have affinity for their animals, their pets, what Elana's talking about is, if you have a pet dog, a pet cat, it's the same situation.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yes, and...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, does Clifford get hassled? I mean, he's doing all this work, and I'm wondering, Does he ever get disrupted? Does he ever have problems doing his work?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
But, some people criticize him for isolating, and this is one of the reasons. He's a very shy and scientific type of mind, not an extrovert by any means, very hard worker, very honest, and when he has been harassed, and he had the fibers in a terrible way to the degree that he had to have his teeth removed. I mean, the gums are a real favorite. Gums and vagina, real favorite of these creatures because it's moist. Yeah. Constantly moist. So yes, and he's had a few other that I don't feel free to share, but you bet he is watched, and yet I get the feeling that they're interested in what he can come up with, given that they're giving him no resources whatsoever, and he's struggling. He's struggling. So if there's anyone out there that knows any way to help, let me know. Let me give you the 7 operations that he believes, and I would agree with them. I just hadn't made a list that are what chemtrails, heart pump, and dump are about. Weather, environmental modification, and we're all seeing that with our extreme weather. 2, electromagnetic operations. Ionization of the upper atmosphere is drawing charged particles into our lower atmosphere. Barium particulates are being spread for more conductivity, as is aluminum. And the only reason it's being used so much along with barium, because barium actually is better for conductivity, is that aluminum gives you 4 times the amount for your buck. So I know Dane talks a lot about how the aluminum is destroying the soil, is alkalinizing the soil and killing forests and plants, etc. But that's the only reason they use the aluminum. Otherwise, they'd use barium all the way. Okay, number 3. So we have so far weather modification and electromagnetic operations. Number 3, military operations. Yes, weapons. And when we say weapons here, you understand that communications is a weapon. You need to signal those drones to do what they do. You need to, now we have the super soldier. You need to signal that super soldier whose mind is no longer his own.
Yeah.
Military operations are they have a term they call OOTW, operations other than war. Well, what they mean is, anything non-lethal, quote unquote, and we all know that non-lethal is, of course, lethal. Number 4, biological operations, biotechnical delivery of biowarfare components via nanotech. That's what we have here. Yeah, okay. Number 5, planetary and geophysical operations. Altered plasma means dramatic Earth changes via the troposphere and the magnetosphere. So those are jeopardized as well, which is very, very concerning to me. Okay, then the 6th operation would be intelligence, what supposedly Snowden told us we didn't know, which I already knew for 10 years. Sophisticated surveillance of everything and everyone on Earth for the sake of what the military calls C4, which is command, control, communications, and computers. So intelligence is not just the NSA, CIA, but the whole intelligence community, and it has to do with surveillance, yes, but surveillance on a scale that most people haven't thought of yet, which is sensors, tiny microscopic micron thick or 0.1 micron thick sensors have been released into the environment on a massive scale. They're not just in the new clothes you buy at the department store to see where their clothes are going and what you're wearing. They are everywhere, and we have breathed them, we have eaten them, we have drunk them down. All right, so that's the 6th, intelligence. letting them know everything they want to know when they want to know it. And finally, the seventh, which is the newest that he's come up with, and I think it's true, but I don't feel prepared to go into it very deeply, is detection of exotic propulsion systems. This would be, yes, UFOs. This would be electromagnetic disks, possibly those that have been developed secretly by various governments, including our own, and the other kind, which are, I call them plasma ships.
Okay.
And they are from other parallel dimensions. And it is very possible that this ionization is to ease the ability to, with infrared, to see into that realm. That's very possible.
Interesting.
So those are the seven.
Well, it's interesting you should say number 7, because I have a friend of mine who had gotten some information out of Germany and said that one of the reasons for the aerosol spraying was to disrupt the Schumann resonance, and that was because there was some technology that utilizes the Schumann resonance in order for their vehicles to travel.
And I could be wrong. That definitely strikes me as disinformation, in that the Schumann resonance is what we, humans and animals, mammalians, operate off of. Well, the entire planet does, 7.83. I mean, I have it like drilled into my brain from years ago in biology classes. So, yes, they are attempting to change our frequency, which has to do, again, with the transhumanist future. But as far as off-planet, every time I hear that word off-planet, I get a little nervous because, first of all, I'm not going to be able to prove anything.
Right.
And second of all, I'm really concerned about what the hell's going on here. I want to cover that. I'm sort of a Occam's razor kind of person. Yeah. Why make it more complex? Let's get down to what we have right in front of us and figure that out. And then maybe we will be able to, because I know there's another realm in which beings of consciousness have plasma bodies. I know that. But I am not able to go into those parallel realms, prove much of anything here other than through my own experience. And I have experienced one of those plasma entities, and therefore I know they exist. And, and you go back and you look at William Crick, the father of chemistry or whatever, and he was a great attendee of seances in London, I assume, where you would see these ectoplasm forms of people who were dead. And, yeah, maybe the photographs were altered, maybe that's all BS. But it is very possible that plasma, being the fourth state of matter, is also a body that some form of another type of consciousness life could take on in order to manifest on this three-dimensional plane. Oh, well, actually four-dimensional, because they would be, I mean, it's possible. I have no problem with that, none whatsoever. But once we start talking about off-planet, I think I'm offensive to people. I don't mean to be, but there's no way I can document that. There's no way I can prove that.
No, that's
but
fair
if people
enough.
Yeah. So that's about as far as I want to take number 7. I was thrilled that because I remember one night when Clifford and his wife and my friend and I were standing outside their place in Santa Fe, and we had Clifford's wonderful telescope out. We were laughing, talking about UFOs, and looking up at the stars, and suddenly Clifford is looking through the viewer and says, wait a minute, and because he's very skeptical of UFOs, he used to be, and he says, look at that, look up there. There's something blotting out an entire corridor of the sky. How could it be that big? And it was true. There were no stars. As this thing was moving across the sky, we would then see the stars behind it coming back. And so, it's like, whoa, it's in a mysterious universe. I'm the first one to say that.
Yeah.
But what I can document is pretty limited, I'm sure.
I keep a very open mind to all that stuff, Elana, and I completely understand what you're saying. I mean, we cannot prove this, and so sometimes you can wind up going off on a wild goose chase. And your point is well made. Let's just stick to here, and let's work on what we know and major on that. Let's figure this out first.
Yeah, and I, as far as what else the book goes into, I did want to mention the introduction. I'm quite pleased with the introduction because I said some things that I've been thinking about for years, and I just want to reiterate it. I'm sure it's not new to your audience. But it is that we can't wait for the expert to step forward and tell us the truth. And I see this as possibly a clarion call to consciousness and to our confidence in our ability to be able to look through evidence, whatever it is, and it can include hearsay. I do not discount hearsay. I have a master's in historiography, and as a historian, hearsay is valuable. People have perceptions, and I do not discount those. I am not living in a world of documentation. Right. I am living in a world with people, and people who have good perception equipment. It's simply that we need to share that information, and in the introduction I talk about what a wonderful democratic opportunity this really is for the common people, not the elites, the common people. We're not experts. We're not plasma physicists. We're not atmospheric physicists. But you can really put together a whole lot if you're paying attention and willing to compare and contrast sources. And that's what you'll see in this book. I am neither of those scientists. Yes, I am friendly to biology, and I am not afraid of hard work in a scholarly way. Not at all. But I still had a lot of decisions to make. Is this source dependable? Can I use this source? And I talk about that in the introduction.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, how do you vet through those sources? Because how do you determine what it is that is a keeper and what it is that you just should set aside or toss?
Well, I have some friends who are very political, and they are much tighter on sources and more mainstream than I am. I always remember what Malcolm X said years ago, and I am a 60s person. He said, "I'm for truth, no matter who tells it." And the problem for me is, okay, I can throw certain sources out. I mean, I know that I feel a little uneasy whenever I'm on the terrain of some people. You mentioned David Icke earlier. I'm a little uneasy, but I will listen because there's a lot of truth in it and what he says. And then Alex Jones, I feel the same way. In fact, I feel that Alex Jones is our David Icke. Fox News, I never listen to. I've already made my decision about that. And you have to come to terms. And the cool thing is, there are so many sources. So many sources. Yeah, some of them pick up something and just repeat what they got from the original source. Right. But you can find it especially if you have access to some of the open source documents of the military and the military industrial complex. And there are several major documents that are not specious, they're having fun at our expense. They really are thinking in these terms for their future. In one of the great Air Force documents, 2025, I've read through that, and some of the ideas are just outrageous. But I know they're being serious. This is what they want. They want it by 2025. And they're well on their way. So I can't give people a magic formula for how they're going to figure out what's true and what isn't, but of course we have each other. And therefore, if we can find people in our own ranks whom we can depend upon, and we have seen them before in other articles that they've written, in other blogs that they've written, they are dependable, then we can take them as one of our sources, and we continue from there. I mean, I have a litmus test of my own that I use, which is 5 sources across the board, all agreeing on something. That's how I do it. I go from the right wing to the left wing and try to make an amalgam. And then my other thing is I sleep on it, maybe for a few days before I buy it. And then if I decide later that I've been wrong, I quickly admit I was wrong and make the adjustment. There's no pride here.
Yeah.
We're interested in truth. We want the truth. I often say to people, and they probably think I'm kidding, but I say I want to die with as few lies in my soul as possible. This is my great objective in life.
It's a great objective.
As a historian. Yes. And I know it's hard in this era of disinformation and lies and subterfuge. And it's called the National Security Act of 1947, by the way. That was where we went wrong. And Harry Truman, who was used, he saw that. He saw it later. He said he made a big mistake. Yeah, he made 2 big mistakes. The National Security Act, 3 big mistakes. The bomb, yep. The National Security Act, and the CIA. All 3 were giant mistakes made through Harry Truman. So I have great confidence that we're going to prevail, just perhaps not before I'm food for worms. It will take a while. But we must dedicate ourselves to the truth for now so that the next generations have these documents and the ability to know what their grandma or grandpa decided was true. We need to communicate with the young. We need to keep going because this will not work. No will to power has ever worked in this world.
That's exactly right. And so, Elana, what I want to do here to kind of wind things up is, could you give our audience some details on how to obtain your book and your website or how to get in contact with you, all that good stuff?
Sure, thank you. You have to control me. I can talk forever
you're doing
about
great. This is a fabulous conversation. You're going to come back.
Okay. Yes, the book, Chemtrails, HAARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth, is put out by Feral House Press. You can go right to their website and get it, or you can go to Amazon and get it, or you can go to your local bookstore because there are dozens of distributors have it. And the only thing is that the West Coast was out. I think they're flush again because they just didn't order enough. It's selling very well.
Wake up.